Inside Yale's Voynich library sits a book that looks as if it should have been sold long ago. It has pages, ink, paragraphs, repeated words, diagrams, plants, zodiac wheels, naked figures in green pools, fold-out charts. It is not a rumor and it is not a lost legend. You can turn through its images online. And yet no accepted scholar on earth can tell you, with confidence, what the text actually says. That sentence needs one correction before the mystery gets away from us. Many people have claimed to read it. Some announced they had cracked the code. Some said it was shorthand. Some said Hebrew. Some said Nahuatl. Some said a Romance language. Some said nonsense. What no one has produced is a solution that experts across manuscript study, linguistics, and cryptography agree is reproducible, coherent, and truly decisive. This is the Voynich Manuscript, Voynich MS for 08, usually sold online as the world's most mysterious book. That label is useful for a thumbnail, but the reality is more interesting. The mystery is not that the book is cursed, supernatural, or forbidden. The mystery is that it is plainly a serious object made by skilled hands, probably for an educated audience, and yet the basic meaning of its writing remains unsettled after centuries of attention. The safest place to begin is with the facts that are no longer really in dispute. The manuscript is real. It is old. It is made on parchment. It is illustrated all the way through. And carbon dating performed at the University of Arizona, reported by Yale, placed the parchment in the early 15th century, between 1404 and 1438. That result did not solve the book. It only narrowed the field and killed several comfortable myths. One of those myths was the famous Roger Bacon theory. For years, admirers wanted the manuscript to be the secret work of the English friar Roger Bacon, who died in the 13th century. The dating made that essentially impossible. If the parchment belongs to the early 1500s? Fine. If it belongs to the early 1400s? Still far too late for Bacon. The book could imitate older styles. It could preserve older ideas. But the old Bacon certainty collapsed. Yale's own material description is careful here. The manuscript is commonly described as having been written in Central Europe at the end of the 15th century or during the 16th, while the parchment itself tested earlier. That gap matters. A page can sit unused before a scribe writes on it. So the dating gives us a boundary, not a named author standing in a candlelit room on a specific date. Good history begins by respecting that difference. What does the book actually look like? The Voynich description divides it into several broad visual sections. There are botanical pages full of plants that seem familiar for half a second and then become impossible when you look harder. There are astronomical and astrological diagrams with suns, moons, stars, and zodiac figures. There is a so-called biological section filled with small female figures, baths, tubes, vessels, and strange connected pools. There are fold-out cosmological diagrams. There are pharmaceutical-looking pages. And there are dense recipe-like text pages. That is why the book refuses to die as a subject. If it were only text, some people would dismiss it as an unsold cipher and move on. If it were only pictures, scholars would classify it as an odd illustrated manuscript and move on. Instead it sits between categories: herbal, medical, astrological, alchemical, devotional, mnemonic, possibly practical, possibly performative. The pages do not let you settle into one genre for long before some new section quietly destabilizes the last conclusion. The writing itself is another reason people keep coming back. Voynich, the nickname usually given to the script, looks organized. Some characters recur constantly. Some clusters appear at the beginnings or ends of words more often than chance seems to like. Lines are orderly. Paragraphs are neat. The text does not look like someone scribbling gibberish at random. But a structured appearance is not the same thing as a solved language, and that gap is where generations of overconfidence have died. This is where myth needs to be separated from fact. Fact, the script is undeciphered. Fact, people smarter than most of us have tried to solve it and failed to persuade the field. Myth, that this automatically means aliens, demons, Atlanteans, time travelers, or a conspiracy to hide the truth. An unsolved manuscript does not become supernatural just because human expertise has not closed the case. History is full of objects that resist us without being magical. The provenance trail, unlike the language, can be followed in fragments. Yale's highlight page says the codex was once in the orbit of Emperor Rudolf II, Holy Roman Emperor, who reportedly bought it for 600 gold ducats and believed it was by Roger Bacon. That belief tells us something important. The book was already being marketed as an intellectual marvel centuries ago. The manuscript's mystery is not modern internet decoration. Mystery has clung to it as part of its value for a very long time. After Rudolf, the trail passes through Jacobus Horsicki de Tepanex, whose name appears on the first folio in a trace visible under ultraviolet light. Later the book turns up with Johannes Marcus Marci of Kronland, who in 1666 sent it to the Jesuit scholar Athanasius Kircher. This is one of the great fixed points in the story because the manuscript survives alongside the famous letter that accompanied it, and that letter shows that by the 17th century the book was already a puzzle. Marci's letter matters because it shows the case was cold even then. He describes a manuscript that had defeated earlier efforts to read it and sends it on to Kircher because Kircher had a reputation as a man who might solve impossible languages. Notice what that means. People were already behaving toward this book the way people behave today: find the brilliant polymath, hand him the unsolved thing, and wait for revelation. The revelation never came. Athanasius Kircher was exactly the kind of figure who attracts stories like this. Jesuit scholar, collector, linguist, speculator, builder of grand systems, a man who stood at the edge where scholarship and wonder still touched. If anyone from that age was going to decode a manuscript that looked half medical and half cosmic, people thought it would be Kircher. But if he solved it, no accepted solution survived with the book. The manuscript remained unread even in the hands of a famous universal mind. Then, for a long stretch, the trail goes dim. The manuscript disappears from ordinary public view and re-emerged in the early 20th century. In 1912, rare book dealer Wilfrid Voynich acquired it from the Jesuit college at Frascati near Rome. This is the moment that gives the book its modern name. Voynich understood immediately what he had, not merely an old codex, but a perfect storm of age, secrecy, visual strangeness, and scholarly frustration. He did not discover the mystery. He relaunched it. That relaunch matters because modern fame changes a manuscript's life. Once photographs circulate, once newspapers and scholars and amateurs begin arguing in public, a medieval object becomes a modern spectacle. Every undeciphered page becomes a challenge issued not to one court or one monastery, but to the entire literate world. The Voynich manuscript becomes part evidence, part celebrity. From that point on, the book does not just sit in an archive. It attracts people who want to be the one who finally explains it. That is also when the nonsense begins to scale. Some people approach the book with real methods. Others approach it with the emotional certainty of treasure hunters. They start with the conclusion and work backward. They decide it must be a code, or a fake, or women's medicine, or astronomical data, or a lost language. Then they force every plant, every loop, every repeated ending to fit the answer they already wanted. The manuscript survives every one of these attacks by simply remaining itself. Why are the plants so important? Because plant books were practical books. If the drawings depicted known species, or careful hybrids, or a local herbal tradition, they could anchor the language in a region and purpose. But the illustrations do not cooperate. Some look partly real and partly invented. Some seem assembled from pieces of multiple plants. Some may reflect stylized copying traditions rather than direct observation. The result is infuriating: enough resemblance to tempt classification, enough distortion to defeat certainty. The zodiac pages create a similar trap. You can point to familiar signs. Pisces looks like fish. Taurus is a bull. Sagittarius appears. but the details around them are strange, local, and often crowded with small female figures. The book keeps offering you islands of recognition inside a sea of refusal. This is why it feels like it should be close to readable. It keeps speaking to the eye in recognizable genres while denying the mind a stable key. Then there are the so-called bathing or biological pages, some of the most famous images in the manuscript. Small nude women stand in pools, climb through tubes, or emerge beside bulbous vessels and green liquid. This is exactly the sort of imagery that fuels internet nonsense. But responsible description has to stay modest. These may relate to medicine. They may connect to humoral or reproductive ideas. They may represent baths, organs, processes, or symbolic sequences. What they are not is proof of some lost alien plumbing manual. The foldouts are another reason the manuscript feels expensive and purposeful. Foldouts cost effort. They imply importance. Someone wanted some diagrams to open outward into larger systems than the normal page could hold. One of the most famous, the so-called Rosette's foldout, looks like a network of walled forms, pathways, circles, stars, and structures that invite everything from urban interpretation to cosmological speculation. The honest answer is that nobody has achieved consensus. The pages are vivid, their meaning remains contested. So could the whole thing just be a hoax? That is one of the most common fallback explanations, and it sounds sensible at first. If no one can read it, maybe it was never meant to be read. Maybe someone created an elaborate fraud and fooled centuries of collectors. The problem is that a medieval hoax of this scale is not a simple idea. You would need parchment, ink, organization, and a text system robust enough to maintain internal regularity across a long manuscript. Possible is not the same as proven. Yale's published materials point in a more disciplined direction. Carbon dating placed the parchment in the 15th century. Materials analysis found pigments and inks consistent with medieval practice. That does not certify sincerity or purpose, but it does make the lazy version of the hoax theory much weaker. This is not a 20th century prank on fresh paper. If it is a deception, it is an old and labor-intensive one. Anyone arguing forgery still has to explain what kind of forgery, by whom, and for what actual gain. There is another problem with the hoax theory. Hoaxes usually aim at something concrete. Money, status, doctrinal influence, prestige. The Voynich Manuscript is difficult even as a fraud because it does not obviously flatter a single patron, preach a clean doctrine, or imitate a famous lost book closely enough to cash in on one simple lie. It sits in a murky zone where the effort feels too high for nonsense and the results too obscure for easy profit. That is not proof. It is just one reason the object resists dismissal. What about code breakers? The manuscript has attracted them for obvious reasons. If it is encrypted language, perhaps statistical analysis can break it. Yet code breaking only works when the system is real, the sample is sufficient, and the assumptions are sound. A manuscript that may mix abbreviation, unknown orthography, specialized subject matter, and unusual structure is not a tidy wartime intercept. Cryptography alone cannot rescue bad historical assumptions. The Voynich case punishes people who arrive with one tool and treat every page as if it were built for that tool. Modern computers did not end the mystery. That is one of the most important psychological facts in this story. Every generation expects that its method will be the one that finishes the job. Renaissance humanists believed broad learning would do it. Enlightenment scholars believed classification would do it. 20th century code breakers believed mathematics would do it. 21st century internet detectives believe large datasets and machine learning will do it. Yet the manuscript keeps surviving the confidence of the age examining it. This is also why the book is perfect for overclaiming. The manuscript contains just enough real structure that every proposed solution can produce a handful of thrilling moments. A pattern seems to align. A plant label seems to correspond. A repeated word seems to map onto a repeated diagram. And then the solution collapses under scale. It fails across other folios. It ignores manuscript structure. It depends on special pleading. Or it produces text that technically decodes but reads like nonsense. Partial excitement is not a decipherment. Medieval manuscript scholars have a harder standard for victory than internet culture does. A real solution should explain how the system works across the book, not only on cherry-picked pages. It should respect the codicology of the object, the linguistic behavior of the text, the illustrations, and the historical context all at once. One elegant trick is not enough. One viral thread is not enough. If a theory cannot survive repeated independent use by other experts, it has not solved the manuscript. It has only entertained it. That may sound disappointing, but it is actually the reason this manuscript is still worth taking seriously. An unsolved object can reveal a lot without yielding its final key. The Voynich Manuscript shows us how knowledge moved through collectors, emperors, Jesuit scholars, dealers, libraries, chemists, cardicologists, and online obsessives. It shows us how strongly people want a text to mean something definite. It also shows how often the past answers the desire with silence. The Binek Library's role in the modern phase of the story is crucial. By preserving, digitizing, and publishing the manuscript's images, Yale transformed a private obsession into a public research object. That matters because mystery can breed mythology when access is rare. Open images do not solve the problem, but they at least make the argument more honest. Anyone can see the same folios. Anyone can test claims against the same artifact. The manuscript is still obscure, but it is no longer hidden in the old sense. And that changes the question. Instead of asking, who is secretly keeping this unreadable book from us, the better question becomes, why do human beings keep falling in love with manuscripts they cannot dominate? The answer is partly aesthetic. The Voynich pages are beautiful. The colors still hold. The script looks alive. The foldouts feel ceremonial. The plants are uncanny. The diagrams feel purposeful. The book does not merely withhold meaning. It performs meaning. It looks like knowledge even when knowledge cannot yet be extracted. There is also a deeper reason. An unreadable book is an insult to literate pride. We like to believe that enough expertise, enough computation, enough time, and enough confidence will force the world open. The Voynich Manuscript is a small medieval object that keeps whispering no. Not never, perhaps. But not yet. It stands as proof that surviving artifacts do not owe the present immediate legibility. Some things can be preserved, catalogued, scanned, translated into metadata, and still remain meaningfully closed. So here is the clean myth vs fact ending. Fact: the Voynich Manuscript is a genuine historical codex, now at Yale. Fact: the parchment dates to the early 15th century. Fact: the book has a documented ownership trail by the 17th century and a modern rediscovery in 1912. Fact: many claimed solutions exist. Fact: none has achieved broad scholarly acceptance. Myth: that this uncertainty proves magic, aliens, or fraud. Those are stories people tell when ambiguity feels unbearable. The better story is harder and, for that reason, more satisfying. Someone in late medieval or early modern Europe spent real money, real labor, and real intention creating a book that still resists us. It passed through emperors, scholars, and dealers. It survived because generation after generation believed it might yield. It still might. But until a solution explains the text, the images, the structure, and the history together, the Voynich Manuscript remains what it has been for centuries, not a solved code, but a disciplined mystery. And that may be the most unsettling part. The book is not empty. It is not blank. It is not noise. Meaning is in there, or was in there, for somebody. The author knew more than we do. The first readers, if there were first readers, knew more than we do. Their world built the key and then misplaced it. What survives is the lock, beautiful, elaborate, intact, and still refusing every hand that reaches for it.